For some time here on the channel, we've been trying to get an idea of exactly how massive online platforms will be approaching advertising during this election. What will they allow? What will they block? What will they profit off of? We've talked quite a bit about Facebook's struggle to make clear exactly what their requirements in terms of authenticity and verification of information will be. But what about Google? And I've been reading some very interesting things that are developing quite rapidly. We're joined now by Emily Birnbaum, tech policy reporter with Protocol, who's been writing about this recently. Emily, welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Glad to have you here. And so as I alluded to in the intro, we initially requested you join us to talk about an article you'd written. That has been updated since then. But can you give us an idea of initially what the story was?
Yeah, so early last week, I started hearing from some sources in Democratic firms, Democratic digital firms, that they were not able to place political advertisements that mentioned the coronavirus on Google's dominant, powerful ad platform. And they were hearing from Google that this was due to their quote unquote sensitive events policy. So, sort of quietly, at the beginning of February, Google instituted this sensitive events policy that basically blocks most advertising about the coronavirus because they said this is a rapidly developing situation. And they were starting to see advertisers trying to capitalize on sort of the frenzy of traffic that's emerged. People just trying to find out more information about COVID. And but unintentionally, what ended up happening was political advertisers were swept in that as well. So if you were a Democrat who wanted to say criticize the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus, you weren't able to do that on Google, which obviously if you're not able to do that on Google, one of the two most powerful ad platforms, you're very limited and your strategy has to pretty much change overnight.
Yeah, and we have to acknowledge that we're in the middle of an election, but this is an event that has been heavily political, and concerns about exactly what the response will be in the future very political. So I understand why some of these organizations or individuals, their teams who are trying to advertise would be frustrated by this. I'm curious, the sensitive events policy, have you seen this invoked to block advertising, potentially political advertising, in other instances not related to coronavirus?
Yeah, so they usually use it for things like natural disasters, like, an earthquake in Puerto Rico or a shooting. But oftentimes, those disasters, they only last for maybe a couple hours, maybe a couple days, but this is going to last for weeks and for months. And so Google's presented with this sort of unprecedented situation.
And it looks like they have already, either they were already planning to develop their strategy, or some people are saying potentially they have responded to the criticism, but their stance has changed, correct?
Yeah, so they said, when we first instituted this policy and it was very sweeping in when faced with enormous challenges in an unprecedented situation. And now they're sort of iterating on it and they're saying that they are going to allow political advertisers to talk about coronavirus, to place ads about coronavirus, but they're still kind of working out how they're going to do that safely and how they're going to do that in a way that doesn't unintentionally end up allowing politicians to promote misinformation on their platform. So it's sort of like a delicate balancing act that Google has to do now.
And I know you spoke with, concerning this update, you spoke with some who are worried that the timeline isn't immediately clear, that it's nice to know that at some point they might be able to do the advertising, but will it be in a day? Will it be in a month? Has there been any follow-up from Google that's clarifying anything regarding the timeline for this?
Not yet, but I really do get the sense that it's going to be soon, not necessarily within a month, but probably a matter of maybe a couple days or a week or something like that. They're going to at least provide clarity, if not, totally allow all political advertisers to suddenly place everything they want.
I'm curious. I had mentioned earlier that we've had a guest on who's been doing a lot of critical coverage of Facebook and how they've allowed certain campaigns, including the president's, to run ads for pay containing information that Facebook has already acknowledged is not accurate. I'm curious, in regards to allowing critical coverage of the coronavirus response, have you seen anything formal from either Facebook or Twitter, any of these other organizations, in terms of what their stance is going to be? Are any responding in the same way that Google has so far?
Yeah, so Facebook is allowing politicians to place ads about coronavirus. It's indicative of their larger sort of quote unquote free speech oriented strategy and approach when it comes to political ads. And so I have no impression that they intend to curtail that whatsoever, which could, ultimately lead to a situation where a politician places an ad that promotes a hoax and then Facebook has to deal with the fallout from that. But right now, they say they are blocking ads that promote misinformation about the coronavirus. So, for instance, even if a politician places an ad that they deem could have real world harm, then they would take that down. But it hasn't happened yet.
And so as we're talking about this, I mean, obviously there's a web of different concerns. You don't want to, these organizations either don't want to in reality or don't want the perception that they're cracking down on people's free speech rights, which obviously they will be criticized for, but they also feel that they have a duty to safeguard the population from getting information that's inaccurate. When you've been talking with either Google or any of these other organizations, has any of the sort of has there been any anxiety around that? Like, I know that YouTube has, they've stopped some misinformation around 5G and coronavirus on YouTube recently, but I'm sure that they're being attacked as a result of that. I'm curious how the corporations are feeling, while they're trying to weigh these different concerns.
I just think it is so enormous, and it's been sort of difficult for a long time to get the platforms to, act as quote unquote arbiters of truth. They wanted to stay out of a lot of the messier, more political arguments about what's true and what's false. But right now, it's sort of, when Google creates policy, when Facebook creates a policy, the same thing as a government creating a policy in some ways. And what their approach has been to try to take as much authoritative information as they can and just put it at the top of people's feeds or serve it to all of their, millions of users. And it's a huge responsibility. And I think a lot of people who watch these companies say they're taking more drastic actions than they really ever have.
Interesting. Yeah. And obviously incredibly consequential. I mean, there are a number of campaigns that need to be able to advertise in the near term around this, because this is going to be not just, the number one issue on people's minds, but it might represent, 50 to 90% of what people are thinking about politics. So, thank you so much for staying on them concerning this, because it is very consequential. Emily Birnbaum, tech policy reporter with Protocol. By the way, we're going to put both of the articles in the description so people can read for more information. And we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.